Good morning, Mr Mayor, elected members, our independent members, our guests, Clint, Debbie, Andrew, Helen, and our dedicated and hardworking team of officers. Thank you. And the huge amount of public joining us today, online hopefully as well. I think we might have also Monique online, or maybe not yet, but welcome to today's Risk and Assurance Committee meeting. We're going to first open with our karakia. Whakataka te hau ki turu, whakataka te hau ki tonga, kia makina ki uta, kia mātara ki te iha, hi tio, hi huka, hi hutu, te he moriora. Thank you. We have a full complement of the committee this morning. No request for public participation, no late items. Do we have any declarations of interest?
Just the sensitive expenditure report, obviously, that I will be part of. Yep.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And all right, if I could move in relation to the minutes, that we accept both sets of minutes from 16th of October, so that's the public agenda and also the minutes from the public excluded. Moved by Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Olsen. All in favour? Thank you. All right, well, we've already discussed that it's going to be a little bit of the Pei Shan show today. So we'll invite Pei Shan up for the first item. While Pei Shan did you want to bring Andrew and Helen up now as well? Just while you're doing that, I'm going to move that we accept all the reports 6.1 to 6.7 and recognise them as not significant. If I could have a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Young. All in favour? Thank you. We've just accepted all the reports so that we don't have to worry about that procedural element, but there are some resolutions we're going to make under each of the following reports. Pei Shan, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone.
Welcome. You introduce the report and our guests.
Yes. So I'll introduce the report first, and then I'll introduce our guests and pass them over to Andrew. So we have this paper, LGFA Updates. It provides the committee with some updates related to LGFA and the Civic Financial Services Limited. I'm going to take the paper as read and take questions before I pass it on to Andrew to start the presentation on local water done well updates. So I have here Andrew, Mitch, and Helen Mahoney from LGFA to give us some presentations. I'm trying to. This one.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to you today. We're doing having a lot of discussions with councils all around the sort of country on water, and certainly working with a lot of the consultants that are helping the sector, as well as some of the regional sort of working groups as well. So I'll focus primarily on water, and we'll try and go through this 15-20 minutes and then open it up to sort of questions. So just very quickly, sort of by way of background of where LGFA is, it started in 2012. We now have 77 out of the 78 councils, so we don't have Chatham Islands. We have 7 CCOs that we lend to, and over 90% market share of council lending. So Auckland Council and Dunedin Council do a little bit of borrowing in their own name. In terms, just touch on sort of liquidity, so we currently have over 3.4 billion of liquid assets, so that's good because it provides certainty to councils that we can meet your lending requirements. We currently have 1.5 billion liquidity facility from the Crown, and the previous Minister of Local Government, so the change after not too long, announced that the government was going to increase that to $3 billion, which is good given the increase in lending that has been occurring over recent years and will continue as we enter sort of water. Very importantly, LGFA has a AAA credit rating from Standard & Poor's and AA plus from Fitch. They are exactly the same as the government, and that's important in the context of the amount of sector debt. So if we go back to 2008, sector debt was about $4 billion. It's now at about 30, and when we look at the long-term plans, it will go to about $55 billion by 2034. So the ability, I guess, certainty in terms of being able to access finance is really important for the sector, especially in regard to the water reforms, given that a lot of the water entities at inception may not be financially particularly strong, so it may take them a number of years to build strength in their models. Touched on council membership, so 77 of the councils. And there you can see sort of our lending just sort of continuing to grow, and that will continue. In terms of where we issue our debt, so around 3/4 is currently in New Zealand dollars. We have around 20% is issued in the Australian market, and a small amount we issue into Europe, but that's going to increase going forward. So we think going forward, probably 60% is going to be issued in offshore markets, because we've essentially got to the point where we've outgrown the New Zealand capital market. So banks, big investors like ACC and the KiwiSaver funds already have a lot of LGFA bonds, so we really need to go offshore. We hedge everything back to New Zealand dollars. There's no currency risk involved. Lending to CCOs, so we get asked the question, can you lend to the new water CCOs? So in 2019, shareholders, including yourselves, approved LGFA to be able to lend to CCOs and CCTOs. At the time, quite ironically, Waikato Water was being talked about as a concept from the three Waikato councils. In the end, Waipa voted against it, so it never sort of proceeded. But our sort of motivation was we could lend to the councils and you could on lend to your water entity, but where you have multiple shareholders, that would involve a lot of transactions. So it's easier if LGFA just lends directly to the water CCO. What shareholders gave us approval of is we can only lend to a CCO where councils guarantee that lending, or proportionately guarantee. So if you are a minority shareholder in a water CCO, you'd only guarantee in line with probably your equity holding in that entity. So if you own 20%, you'd provide 20% of the guarantee. And it would need LGFA board approval. And each of the CCOs has bespoke covenants, so they don't have the LGFA financial covenants, they have ones we negotiate with them. And there you can see our 7 CCO members down on the bottom right-hand side that we currently have. So infrastructure holdings you won't be familiar with, but that's Nelson and Tasman's joint CCTO that they own. The Minister announced last August that LGFA will be able to lend to water CCOs. Again, we can only do that where there's a council guarantee. So in the case of Auckland, they've asked the government pass legislation that prohibits Auckland Council to lend to Watercare. So that means LGFA is not able to lend to Watercare. They will have to finance in their own name. The reason they're able to do that is under the previous government's 10 water entity model. Only entity A, which is Watercare, would be investment grade on day one. So they have enough balance sheet strength. They can set up their own debt programs. The other 9 were all non-investment grade, but over the 10-year forecast period, they all became investment grade. So I think that's good news for the sector, that over time, the water entities that are created will build financial strength. And that will give them the ability to issue debt in their own name as well as borrow from LGFA. So it's not compulsory that they borrow from LGFA. In terms of the financing, as mentioned, that a guarantee from the councils is important. The benefit to ratepayers is that they will be able to borrow, be more leveraged than councils can be, and that enables debt to be spread over longer periods of time, which potentially reduces water charges. And we can give you examples of, the likes of Tauranga. When you get up against your financial covenants, you actually have to start running big balanced budget surpluses in order to keep repaying debt down. So that puts a lot of pressure on rates. So LGFA can start lending to water CCOs now. So we're potentially looking at the first water CCO being created in July 25. I think the rest of the sectors probably, especially where there's multiple ownership, will be more 26 and even sort of 27 is when these things are created. And again, we might not get consolidation occurring all on day one. You might get further amalgamation over a number of years. So certainly there are the old council that's looking at just staying as they are for the moment, but then rethinking it sort of 2-3 years down the track. So again, we provided guidance to councils last December in terms of what LGFA will require. I think the important thing to note is LGFA is not an advisor. What we're doing is providing the options which we will be able to finance the different water options that councils are considering. So we can tell you, if you keep it in-house, then the LGFA covenants remain as they are now, so you're capped at 280% net debt to revenue. If you create your own water CCO, you'll have bespoke covenants, which will enable you to be more geared than what the council is. And if you create a regional CCO, it will have even greater capacity to borrow. So because there will be bespoke covenants, the funds from operation covenant, which we're talking about, won't be one that applies to everyone. You'll have different ratios and you'll be able to be more leveraged the bigger that the water entity is. And that's exactly the same way that the rating agencies will be thinking about evaluating water entities. So what we're talking about is a framework that will be very consistent with what Standard & Poor's are sort of looking at. So I think both you as owners, us as lenders, all want these water entities to be successful, and so we're all looking to get them to where they're investment grade on a standalone basis over time, and that will de-risk it for you as guarantors and as owners. Councils, water CCOs will be able to have access to exactly the same range of financial products as councils do from sort of LGFA. So it's fixed and floating rate, also standby facilities, and also the sustainable lending products that councils are offering to councils. Again, this is what Infrastructure New Zealand the Infrastructure Commission put out, just sort of highlighting that there's a lot of CapEx to it's only the first 10 years. As we know, it's probably going to be more like a 20, 30-year journey when you look at international comparisons, how long it takes to address the infrastructure deficit. The Minister also announced that LGFA will be able to, or high growth councils will be able to apply for a bespoke covenant from LGFA. So at the moment, we've got the 280% limit. So councils can apply up to 350%. So shareholders approved that in November. So prior to shareholders approving it, councils could have applied for a bespoke covenant, but they would have to get approval from all the other shareholders. So just passing it back to the board to make that decision just provides a little bit more certainty, whereas you don't know at any one time what shareholders would sort of vote. And again, the Infrastructure Commission was in favour of LGFA doing this. It's just really recognising that we have one covenant for all the councils, whereas sort of high growth councils and lower growth councils aren't the same. So higher growth councils, because they're bringing on more revenue in time from growth, have the ability to service greater amounts of debt. I'll just pass over to Helen to talk quickly about sustainability. I mean, sustainability is increasingly important for LGFA, so certainly global investors, domestic investors are asking us a lot more questions about this as are banks to their sort of clients.
Thanks, Andrew. Kia ora. So I guess like many other councils, CCOs in the sector, we also are on our sustainability journey, and we're trying to build a sustainability program, and key parts of that are understanding what our emissions are and how do we reduce them, but also what's our exposure to climate risk. So we are actually captured under the climate disclosure legislation as well, so we are required to report on our climate risks. And I guess because of the nature of what we do, a lot of our exposure comes through our lending to the local government sector. So a key part of our work programme over the next year is really understanding what are the key risks and where are those exposure levels. But in terms of our sustainability programme, probably the main part of that is our sustainable lending products that we offer to councils and CCOs. And really this for us is really important because it's a way for us to encourage ESG and climate change best practice across the sector. But it's really a great way for us to also showcase all the great work that's happening in the sector too. So we have two sustainable lending products. The first is a green, social and sustainability loan, and this can be given to certain projects that deliver environmental and social outcomes. We have a criteria document that's based on international market standards, and this provides criteria against a number of different green social categories. And if a project meets them, then they can be financed through a GSS loan, and a discount can be applied. And these projects can range from a 6 Green Star rated building to an extensive planting programme to manage climate change adaptation, to clean transport networks. So that's the first product. The second one, which was developed and introduced at the end of 2022, is our Climate Action Loan Programme. So this lending programme can be applied to all of the borrowers financing through LGFA, and a council will be eligible to apply for a climate action loan if they have an emission reduction target in place, if they have a plausible plan to achieve those emission reduction targets, and also if they're measuring and verifying their emissions on an annual basis. So we've got a number of borrowers who have engaged with these different programs, and off the back of that, we're able to issue sustainable financing bonds in the debt capital markets. And it's really important for us that we expand our offerings, our ESG offerings to the debt capital markets, because it's just a growing trend, and especially as we do more lending offshore. Certainly our offshore markets in the offshore investors in the Euro markets, etc., are really wanting to see these products come through, and there's high demand there. So we want to be part of the supply that's going into those markets. So these are the key products that we offer. And then on the next page is just an example of the councils that have been approved as climate action loan borrowers to date, and some of the projects that have been financed through our GSS loans. So I'll hand it back to Andrew.
Thanks, Helen. So just, as mentioned, this is just an overview of what's been happening with council debt. So while that's been going up, the good news is that the sector is addressing some of the infrastructure deficit that we've been well aware of for some time. So there's still a lot to do. But it's good that the infrastructure deficit is slowly being addressed. This is the balanced budget outcomes for the sector. So this is just the average of the 78 councils. This is something we pay very close attention to. So we think debt is good if it's being used to invest in infrastructure. Where it's being used for operating purposes, that is sort of more problematic, although we're not too concerned about, deficits in any one given year. The outcomes in 21-22 were certainly a little bit inflated by a lot of government grants occurring from that time, shovel-ready projects, the water sort of grants, provincial growth fund, etc. But you can see over the last 2 years there's been the deterioration just for the, factors that are well known, the cost pressures that have hit the sector, particularly things like the increase in depreciation charges, insurance, rising interest rates, sort of, etc. So we're not surprised at the outcomes. The good news is when we looked at the LTPs for the sector that pretty much across the sector, all councils were taking measures in their financial strategy to sort of address it, albeit that for a lot of councils it was taking 2-3 years to get back to a balanced budget position. And certainly we looked at your LTP and we broadly approve of the financial strategy that you have in line with the infrastructure strategy. And I think it's very positive that, you plan to sort of stick to that, which is not always the case for councils, and we appreciate that affordability is a huge issue in communities, so not easy decisions for councillors to make. And we're certainly not telling councils to put up rates, but what we do want to see is a financial strategy that's sustainable over the longer term. And just these are the 39 councils now have external sort of credit ratings. Again, so while there's been a little bit of downward pressure on those over the last few years on the back of rising debt levels across the sector, they're still very good when we compare them to the sort of banking sector. And that's why investors like investing in LGFA bonds, which aggregate the sector debt, because, over time it's been extremely good credit risk for investors. So I'll finish there and happy to take questions.
Andrew, Helen, thank you very much for that. That's given us a great overview. Before I open up to questions, I'm going to be cheeky and jump in first. And I understand you've been doing a lot of analysis, a lot of thinking about local water's done well in terms of what that looks like from funding perspective for different councils. So from that funding perspective, what water services model is likely to work best for Horowhenua? Acknowledging we have got a decision ahead of us next week to adopt our consultation document. We've got a preferred option at the moment, but keen to get your thoughts.
Happy to share personal thoughts. So as an organisation, the view of the LGFA board is one that we will support the options that councils want to pursue. Whether that option's sustainable in the longer term is something that's going to be played out. What we're seeing across the sector is, especially in the North Island, there seems to be a lot more progress and a trend towards water CCOs than we perhaps thought might be the case. The South Island a little bit more sort of problematic. What we don't know is what steps are the government going to take if they're not happy with the council's water service delivery plan. Personally, I think it's good that you do have options in front of you. One of the problems for councils, particularly the small rural councils, is getting stranded, and them, if you go down south, like if Dunedin want to stay as they are, then it sort of cuts off the options for the likes of a Clutha or a Waitaki or a Waimate, so that then becomes problematic if you haven't got councils around you that are willing to discuss a regional option. I do think the analysis that the Water Industry Commissioner Scotland provided was quite good, and we can look at a lot of the evidence from overseas countries. I think the Water Industry Commission of Scotland's analysis that councils here are inefficient in terms of the operating cost to deliver water services compared to international benchmarks. And the number of connections they thought you need to achieve scale was something like 60,000 connections. So that's where they thought the threshold is. But they thought even if we exclude depreciation, even Watercare, which is the most efficient operator in New Zealand in terms of delivering water services, could halve their operational costs over time when you have international benchmarks. The country we're most going to look like, I think, is Australia, where you get a lot of state ownership and in some places council ownership. But I think Tasmania is probably a good example where you had 29 councils that, and they didn't really want to create a water entity, but they got forced to do it. So they originally created 3 water entities, and within a few years that got merged into one. So that's sort of like for 500,000 people what you sort of end up with. So I think probably there's going to be some inevitability over time that consolidation will occur, just as it did in the electricity sector. But again, LGFA's view is they'll work with whatever the democratic process is to facilitate what councils want to do. And some councils, I must say, have quite strong balance sheets. They certainly have time on their side to come to a decision about what they want to do longer term. Finally, sorry, another interesting thing was sort of Waipa, which is probably similar size to yourselves. They have a couple of Waikato options open to them. So they had research that are done, but they're saying that the in-house option isn't sustainable longer term. So that's an example of a council of a reasonable size saying, look, going alone isn't going to work for us, so we do need to look at a regional approach.
Thanks, Andrew. Members, any questions, comments? Councillor?
Sweet. Cheers for that, Andrew and Helen. That was good. Just a quick question. I guess moving out the funding, or getting more funding from offshore, that's obviously got sustainability and stuff within it. As we look forward, is there a risk of cost increase for the likes of us as council as a result of that sort of product movement?
There is a risk at the moment. Actually, raising money in offshore markets actually cheaper for LGFA than it is in domestic markets. It's a little bit sort of technical, but the single biggest reason for that is the government borrowing is quite high, and that's actually crowding out a lot of the corporate issuance sort of here. So we're actually seeing the higher rate of corporates do more in Australia, but particularly the European and US markets are quite sort of attractive. I mean, the good news is there's no shortage of investors, so being able to issue is not the challenge. But the relative attractiveness of different markets can change over time, so there's a risk that they become more expensive. I think LGFA, the good thing is because we have different options, we can pick and choose the best market at any one point in time.
I'll go. Jonathan, Councillor Proctor.
Thanks for the presentation. I just have a general question around the climate action loans. You've already provided some examples, but can you provide a little bit more detail on what councils have done with them? I mean, it says on your notes that they're general purpose loans. And I suppose the second question is as a council, we have a burgeoning climate action strategy. Do we have to have a separate emissions reduction strategy, or does it have to be within that sort of general strategy that we develop?
Yeah, so in terms of the climate action loans, all of our approved borrowers for those loans have short, medium, and long-term emission reduction targets that ultimately takes them towards net zero by 2050, and they have a plausible climate action plan to support that. Now, their emission reduction plan might be part of a climate change strategy. It might be part of your broader organisational strategy. We're not bothered about where that sits, as long as you have a plausible plan to reduce those emissions. And the key things that we do look for out for as well is that there are those actions are costed. Now we don't require quantitative figures, but we want to make sure that there is funding available to actually plausibly deliver that plan and achieve those targets. And we also look for borrowers to show that the plan has been approved either by the council or by the executive lead team as well. And then we also require borrowers to measure those emissions on an annual basis, and that they're also verified by a third party. So we're aligned with the XRB standards around having a third party verify your emissions. Sorry, can you remind me of the second question? Yeah, so, well, I guess it applies to all of your financing through LGFA. So it's not, so any financing that you do through LGFA, as soon as you request a new loan, the discount that comes with the climate action loan will automatically be applied to that. And the key thing is that we can see those annual reductions are actually happening. So we engage with all of the CAL borrowers every year to receive the verified emissions, and if we can see that your emissions are tracking down, then that's great, and we'll stay on track. If not, then we'll discuss what's going on and how we can potentially support.
So there's just a few pictures up there of some of the sustainable loans that councils have done. So like Christchurch, for example, have done a social housing loan with LGFA. I mean, how it helps LGFA is when we're speaking to investors, we can show them where the proceeds of the money has gone. You might have seen in the media recently, like BNZ sort of saying we're not going to lend to petrol stations, we're going to reduce our agricultural lending. So I guess, sometimes it doesn't really matter what anyone's personal view is. The finance world is changing, and so sometimes you have to adapt with it, because the reality of what a lot of investors are focusing on in terms of when they make their investment decisions.
Independent member Jenny, I think one of your projects is apparently on that from your council. Yeah.
Nice to have. Yeah, the rebuild of Nada Pool is.
Yeah, did you want to speak to it?
I can talk to it briefly. So, yeah, it's a 5-star green building. So there's a whole lot of environmental outcomes and reducing energy use and things like that. So the process with LGFA to get that whole lending piece in place, and for finance perspective, most importantly, get the reduced cost of funds, because there is a little discount on your cost of borrowings when you can tick the box against these criteria. So it was a really easy process. They were incredibly helpful. They didn't make us climb mountains. They made it an easy process. So it's definitely, I was interested to find out where things have got to here in terms of that journey and the opportunities that you've got to switch on that facility and get some reduced cost of funds.
Thank you. I can answer that. Officers, we have council has recently, last year, adopted a climate action plan and also a emissions reporting framework, set aside budget for a development of an emissions reporting framework. Did any officer want to speak to that beyond what I've outlined?
I might just mention, so we've had initial conversations, Andrew and I, last time we met, and Helen is going to meet with Jacinta from a climate change perspective while she's here today. So we are still making sure we're informed and understand what we need to do, so that as we plan and look through the capital program, we can take advantage of it where it's appropriate.
Thank you for that line of questioning, Councillor Proctor. Mayor Wandin.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of directions of questions I'm keen on sort of trying to explore a bit more. One is around the CCO. And your report mentions the LGFA board is not required to grant a water CCO membership. So if you're not satisfied in terms of the makeup of that, is that what it means? Because I'm sort of not confident that we're going to get a lot of combined membership CCOs. There's going to be a heck of a lot of councils out there that are going to say, oh, we're doing it okay, we don't need any more help. So that we're going to end up with this massive amount of CCOs, which are all going to require independent boards and have no oversight from council, so-called. And my concern is that the country's not able to actually provide that sustainably. And I just wonder what part you guys will play in terms of in influencing that sort of different makeup of CCOs.
Thank you. I think that's a fair sort of observation, so I don't disagree with any of those comments. So I think there is some scale in setting up CCOs. I think in terms of the question on LGFA board approval, yes, they do have to get LGFA approval. What the LGFA board is looking for is a longer term financial strategy that is sustainable. So if we weren't comfortable with any CCO's financial strategy, then we could either try and discuss that with them and work on some sort of solution. So it's coming up with a model for the water entity that is going to meet or is really going to progress the water entity so that it does get investment grade credit metrics over time. That's what LGFA is looking for. We did say we're prepared to allow up to a 5-year sort of transition period if that occurs. We're not saying it has to be compliant in the first sort of few years, but that's where the LGFA board approval comes in. In terms of, the sort of costs, I mean, I think there's going to be a real skill shortage, not only in directors but also in employees. There's a lot to be delivered, so I think sometimes scale enables you to get good directors, good staff in terms of being able to deliver it. So some councils going standalone may struggle to keep their good staff. I mean, it is going to be a more staggered transition than under the previous government's model, but LGFA isn't endorsing government policy. We're just working with what is in front of us. We're also doing a lot of engagement with the likes of Morrison sort of Lois. They're asking a lot of the technical sort of questions. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes in terms of, making sure everyone understands how things are going to work.
Sorry, Chair. My next question is around the transfer of debt. And which says here in the report that that's a decision for each council to agree with their water CCO. I can see some problems in determining that because, a significant part of our current debt is free waters and, does that include part of the roading debt because stormwaters and all those sorts of things. So there could be some real difficult conversations to be had around that.
That's correct. So LGFA isn't going to determine how much debt you can sort of transfer. The key thing for LGFA is to see the model that for the water entity that's financially sustainable. So once you've decided on how much debt that's going to transition, whether you're going to have differential water charges or not, there are issues for each of the water entities to decide. LGFA wants to see the sustainability of the financial model in totality being able to work. Yeah, under the previous government's model, DIA went round and negotiated the water debt with each sort of council, but they had 8 different methodologies, so it's not a perfect science in exactly how much your water debt is. But that will again have to be something that, in conjunction with your consultants, that you work through with the other councils that you're working with and get some agreement on that. The good news is, you look around the rest of the world, a lot of countries have done their water reforms 20, 30 years ago, and everyone's got through these issues, so they are all solvable.
Yeah, well, I won't be around in 20, 30 years to see that. But anyway, and finally, can I just, around that graph that you had around the sector debt, that's gone up 80% over the last 5 years. We're going to see a huge increase in debt levels, obviously, with the renewals and new growth that's going to happen in the three waters sector. And I'm not confident that my ratepayer will actually benefit from that. All we're doing is transferring a lot of the cost of the CCOs and the entities and the interest. I mean, we're already paying a huge amount of interest on the debt that we have compared to the rates that we get. And so how do we reassure our ratepayers that this is a model that actually they are going to benefit from?
I agree with those comments again. One of the challenges for the sector is that over recent years, debt has been increasing faster than revenue. So that is, again, this is Infrastructure Commission said that that's not sustainable in the longer term. You have to get to some point where debt can keep growing, but revenue has to grow at the same rate to basically support it. Affordability is a big issue, but it's not just councils, it's the government facing it too. We've got hard decisions over health and education, the Defence Force, everything needs more money. So again, and someone's got to pay for it. With water reforms, I mean, they're not an option. So this is something that the government has decided. There's going to be water standards, whether you keep things in-house or through a CCO, a regional CCO, you're going to have to comply with the water standards. So, and the ratepayers will have to bear the cost. Standard & Poor's made the comment, look, there's no free lunch here. If we're going to, it was roughly treble the amount of capex, water capex that we were doing previously. It's going to cost more. It doesn't matter whether it's the previous government's model or this government's model. If you're going to triple the water capital expenditure, it costs more. So potentially you can get some efficiencies through scale, which reduces the operating costs. But again, with some of these things on amalgamation, you have to take a long-term perspective. So if you look at over 30 years, it probably is going to be the best solution for most councils. If you take a short-term view, I can see why some councils are saying we're going to be better off in the short term staying as we are, but longer term, I don't personally think that will be the case.
Anything further, Mayor Bernie? No. Councillor Grimstone.
Look, you've just given us another really valuable reason for pursuing our climate for reduced lending costs. But I'm really keen to understand, looking at the list of projects that you've currently funded, the penetration across councils probably isn't where you want it to be. And I'm just keen to understand, I guess, what you see as some of the obstacles or the prohibitors for council to access those schemes that you're seeing in the initial stages.
Yeah, it's a good question, and so I've only been at LGFA for 3 months now, and we've been, started to engage with a number of our borrowers over the last month or so, and I'm getting a better understanding of what a lot of those barriers are, and I think certainly, priority of funding. So I think a lack of funding coming through from central government has meant that a lot of projects have had to be pulled back or shift. That funding has had to shift to other projects where there's a greater need. So I think what I'm seeing come through is a lot of projects around climate change adaptation, flood resilience measures, a lot of planting projects. So you've got projects where there's an immediate response to climate change, but also projects where it is a fundamental part of what councils deliver. So at the moment, you're not really seeing many, low carbon transport projects come through. There are some green building and energy efficiency projects, but the scale just isn't there. So I think really our view is that we're setting the criteria of best practice, and a lot of councils are using that to incorporate it into their capital funding plans. To say this is where we need to get to if we want this discount, but we just acknowledge that that's not always feasible in the short term.
I think it's also councils' internal resources. So the big councils like Auckland have a lot of resources to dedicate a lot of time. So I think that's what LGFA board is sort of saying, look, we'll resource this so we can assist the councils that don't have such significant internal staff, so they can have somewhere where they can come and ask questions and we can sort of help them on that journey.
Just to add to that as well, I think that's one of the big reasons why I've come on board, is to support councils to take them through this process. And we also have access to a number of technical experts through our sustainability committee as well. So we really are here as a resource to, support councils on their journey.
All right. Councillor Grimson.
So what I'm hearing from this piece of work, while it's still relatively in its stages, is there's a real appetite to grow this space in relation to the other funding LGFA does over the next immediate period. Do you feel like you're confident that you've got enough scope within your existing policy parameters to chase this market and grow it significantly?
I think on initial conversations, councils are at different stages of their emission reduction journey or their ESG journey more broadly, but I think there definitely is appetite, and certainly for our perspective, there's a reason why, and we've increased our resource in this space, is because we can see the demand there from our investors, but also from the sector. So I think there is the space is only going to grow. It's just at what pace it grows.
Thank you. Any final questions?
Well, just a comment. I'm interested in those because some of those projects are not money-making projects now, are they? I mean, Takina, for instance, is losing money. And so there's got to be some sort of realistic sort of view of the world in terms of what extra cost it is costing councils and their ratepayers to build something like that, and then the ongoing costs of maintaining it. And and I would view some of those as being nice to haves rather than must haves. So, there's got to be some balance in terms of that. And for councils like us, we're looking at the affordability of projects, and if making it a green building is going to add 10% to the cost, obviously we're going to think twice about doing it. So, I just wonder where the realism in terms of, that, what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is that a lot of water infrastructure would fall under this sort of category, but we haven't been able to do sustainable lending on it because we didn't know where the assets are going to end up. So I think what you're saying is not necessarily going to be representative of what the sector is doing, because as we know, roading and water is by far the biggest sort of bulk. Yeah, I mean, it's not just buildings. I mean, housing, there is a social sort of category. It's also, and the Riverlink project has sort of got environmental sort of aspects sort of to it. I think it's just when councils are trying to identify a project, buildings is one that has a bit of scale to it. So, yeah. But these are international categories, not LGFA making the rules. These are international framework under which you need to issue.
I feel like our council is going to be using that acronym CAL a lot more, particularly Councillor Grimstone and Councillor Proctor are probably going to be reminding us about that. Yeah. Any final questions or comments from the table? Member Jenny.
So can I go back to the water CCO piece? It's so important. Just thinking about the legislation and the pace that this whole water reform's been going at. All councils are preparing water services delivery plans, and they're all going to be delivered in a few months' time. And then I'm just wondering about the impact for LGFA. You said you're going to negotiate with all these CCOs, so maybe, 50 CCOs or so on, negotiate with all of them around terms and so on. So I suppose there's a lot of complexity in that, and the push on pace. It's going to be really important for councils to have certainty about the financing and the cost of that financing. So I'm just wondering about how well prepared LGFA is for that avalanche that's potentially coming to deal with the setup of all those CCOs. And I suppose longer term, obviously there's going to be higher debt levels. I saw the Shareholders Council letter basically saying you need to be prudent and make sure that these new CCOs, the borrowing levels is sensible and sustainable and so on. So there'll be a lot of pressure to understand that big picture of all of it consolidated, the big shift across the borrowings for LGFA and the risk related to that, but then also, that pressure to give certainty to each CCO so they can get on and do the implementation by July 2025. You mentioned, and others want to go, soon after that. So I'm just wondering about that preparation and managing the risks around that.
It is going to be a sort of challenging sort of rollout. I think between the DIA and the select committee meetings is going to take 4 months or something. I probably feel more for the councils than for LGFA. I mean, we'll just work with however it all sort of plays out. But, I mean, it's hard enough for councils, just business as usual, and then you've got all these water reforms, the consultation, working with other councils to sort of get through. So it's just something that we're going to have to get through. I think, it looks quite challenging when we look at the debt numbers and things like that. And certainly the affordability thing is a huge issue. I don't think you can hide from that. But I think the good news is when you look at the rest of the world, that Australia that did their water reform starting in the 1990s, is 20, 30 years later, where they end up is a pretty good place. You speak to Scottish Water and you're 99% sort of compliant. You've got economies of scale, so your water charges have been able to sort of come down. But you've got to start on the journey somewhere, and sort of right at the moment there looks like a lot of challenges, but I think in 10, 20 years' time we'll probably be quite pleased that we've embarked on this sort of journey.
Andrew, Helen, thank you very much for your attendance. It's been very insightful, great discussion. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, and just reach out if you have any sort of questions. Where the LGFA boards, made it very clear that we will help councils as much as we can.
Very much. Committee members, we just have some recommendations on page 7 of your agenda. So I'm going to move on block B to F so that the committee notes Appendix A through E. If I could have a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Olsen. Is there any further discussion before I put that, and hopefully everyone agrees? So all in favour of that motion? Thank you. Excellent. We will then move on to item 6.2, and we will welcome, I think, Debbie and Clint to the table. Thank you for your attendance and patience. Hopefully you saw that there was a very good discussion, so apologies for delaying you both. But thank you for thanks for coming back. And thank you for joining us, Debbie.
So we have Debbie and Clint here to talk about the audit management letter for last financial year. Before we get into that, I just want to introduce this report that reports on the progress of the action items from our monitoring report. For the audit management letter, it was finalised in December last year. There were 5 recommendations that were closed or implemented by Audit New Zealand, which is great news. However, there were 4 new recommendations being added as well at the same time. So these are all detailed in the monitoring report. In summary, we have 28 open recommendations being worked on by officers. This includes 18 from the audit management letter and 10 from PwC tax compliance evaluations. As a forward program, we've also engaged PwC to perform the PAYE compliance evaluation, and that's going to happen in next month. So when the report is finalized, we'll bring it back to this committee again. So as we continue to work through the improvements on the annual report and items identified by Audit New Zealand, that's why we have both Debbie and Clint here to talk about how the process gone and the letter. Over to you, Clint.
Thank you, Paishan. Thank you, Chair, Councillors, Mayor Bernie, for the opportunity to talk this morning. Just a reflection on the last discussion, a very interesting discussion. I'm hoping all councils are going through that. The first item I was going to introduce Debbie. So Debbie's taking over from me with effect for the 30 June 2025 audit. She's already had some level of engagement with the team and hit the ground running, so to speak. Debbie, if you want to just give a quick introduction to it.
I'm looking forward to working with everybody. I am from Audit New Zealand. I've been with Audit New Zealand 8 years, going into my 9th year. The only thing that makes me a little bit different from Clint is that I'm based in Christchurch, but I do come up to Wellington quite a lot because quite a lot of my clients are up this way. So I don't think that'll be an issue or a stumbling block. The staff I've met have been really lovely to me, and I really do look forward to working with everybody here. Feel free to engage with any questions or any items you'd like to have coffee with or to talk about any item.
I'm sure that Clint's already told you about what a great client we are, his favourite client, that we're never any problems. Yeah, that's what, yeah.
That's a good segue to my first point. Gee, so I think the first point is around the audit report itself, which I did present at the adoption meeting. It was unmodified and on time. We are Bernie. The letter I received to you was a good enough push to get it done. But in all seriousness, I think it was a good effort on the part of the team, both from council and from audit. And it's always good to end up with an unmodified audit report, I think, in the current environment in which we operate. Chair, the next item is just some of the key items arising from the audit. First was around the revaluation. So that consumed a lot of time. It is an issue across the sector. 3 water valuations, road evaluations, and getting the system up to a point where we can provide assurance on it is challenging when you have significant increases across councils, neighbouring councils seeing higher increases in councils alongside them. Just the skills and the resource to do that work. So I think we got there in the end. We did end up with a couple of recommendations, and many of those you'll see in the responses from management are already in train and have been dealt with. So the first one was around just reconciliations between the fixed asset register and the general ledger, and keeping those that I like to call that the housekeeping stuff in place. We want to continue to encourage that work carries on. The asset database, there was a lot of consolidation that's happened over the last couple of years, more so in the 24 year. It's making sure that data, there's integrity around it, it's been verified, it's been checked and reviewed, and that it's accurate and it reflects the assets on the ground. Now, that's not always easy without full inspections, but I think, when we looked at the valuation reports last year, they're pretty detailed, it's line by line asset. So how does that then get transferred? And then more importantly, are those assets in the ground and the condition, because that to a large extent informs their remaining useful life. So there's, it's a whole lot of work I know happening around asset inspections, etc. The third one was around oversight of the valuation process. And again, management provided a comprehensive response on that one in our report. I think the part that we're wanting to see more engagement is with this committee and with full council around the valuation reports, and how do you build that into the timetable so that there's a full discussion around the matter at the highest level, governance level. These are big numbers that we're talking about, significant movements year on year, and our council is over it enough
our engagement with management, they clearly are over it. They get engaged in it. It's the governance oversight that we're wanting to see. So whether it's this committee or a full council or a subcommittee that looks at infrastructure valuations and infrastructure in general, because I know many clients sit and say valuations, we don't really care about it, and that's what get your auditors and accountants excited, not really for us. But in your context, it's absolutely important because it drives rates, and I've spoken to that in the past. Next point was just around taking that valuation information and seeing what does it mean for future financial forecasts and whether things need to change because of those uplifts. So, to my point, valuations are important in your context because of the knock-on impact. The last point, and again, I've mentioned this a couple of times, is about working with neighbouring councils, and in Horowhenua's case, you shared your information with Wellington Water. What they did with it, we're not sure, but and how it impacted the other councils in the Wellington region, also not sure, but it's a good start. Again, being able to tap into Kapiti, the Manawatu region, just to make sure that it's important from the number that you end up with on the balance sheet, but also in terms of testing the market, because one of the tests that we do when we check in the valuations, looking at your contracts and checking that against benchmarks and other pieces of information we have to make sure that uplift is reasonable. We're saying, it's good for councils to do that outside of the valuation cycle, and to be engaging with other councils. And how you do that, I suppose, is always the commercial sensitivity about sharing contract information, etc. But I think my sense at this council is that relationships are really good with neighbouring councils, and getting and sharing that information will be beneficial. So that's on the revaluation. On the service performance was the other item. So I think my starting point on that one is that, when I look at 23 to 24, there's been a vast improvement in the way things are done around service performance reporting and providing us information, etc. And it talks to we raised an issue in the previous year on this, and management certainly has responded to it. But audit is not an audit without picking up something. So there were a few things again, and it's housekeeping stuff. It's about CRMs being captured, having supporting documentation. And again, it's not about the audit. It's, if there's a complaint, an inquiry, etc., you've got the information. So having the right supporting information, making sure that there are controls and systems in place when information is captured on the system, it's reviewed by someone independent around the accuracy of it. And then that whatever comes out of the system is independently reviewed by another manager or someone else in the system. That extra pair of eyes is usually helpful. It gives you comfort as a committee and as councillors that it's gone through another level of review before it ends up with you. Now, we're not saying it's the case for every measure, but certainly one or two of the measures we picked up where there were discrepancies, it would have easily have been picked up if it was subject to another layer of review. And that's people, acknowledge that there's time issues around it, it's processing, waiting for data. There's a whole lot of things. I sometimes come and talk about the perfect world, but there's a reality that people have other things to do. But then two last issues, recommendation was around formalizing the IT change processes, management change processes was a recommendation that we put forward, and already that's in train from 1 July 2024. And then completing an IT vulnerability testing exercise. Again, I think that's on the work plan for this year. Please don't ask me about the IT questions because, but that's what my specialist colleagues tell me is very important for you. Chair, I'll
before I move on to the other items, I'm just happy to take questions there. Members, do we have questions, comments on the management letter? Member Jenny?
Thank you, Clint. So it's been great to see over the last couple of years a real step up in processes, improvements, and you've talked to that, and you can see the uplift in capability. Reading this management report is 44 pages long, and there's a hell of a lot of detail in here. And I got quite frustrated with the level of detail, to be honest, and particularly some of the comments where the auditors say one thing, something hasn't been fixed, and then management comment says, no, we've done it, and it's sorted. And, for example, in the sensitive expenditure policies, and there's another one around contract retentions. And so, I'm hoping, maybe this is for Debbie, because the report is what it is, but it's for future year. If we can, I'm hoping that going forward we can sort of uplift this report and make it a bit more strategic, not be down in the weeds. And hopefully officers and auditors can sit down and talk through this stuff and get on the same page so we don't have to read two conflicting thoughts on things, because it's quite frankly a waste of time for us, I think. So those are my thoughts, and happy for you to respond.
Thank you. Through your chair, thanks. Jenny, I think, fair point. The length of the report is driven by previous recommendations. So it is, if we can knock those off, it will significantly reduce the report. The question, I suppose, the challenge for us as auditors is also that, getting into the weeds and keeping it strategic. And on some clients, what we do is we do a report to the CFO, which has the items, the recons and all of those things, and with the view that if they do become, not addressed in a good amount of time, we escalate it to governors. So that is a practice. It is more time consuming, and keep the more strategic stuff for governors in a separate report. So that can be done, and probably something Debbie wants to have a look at. But I think where we are in terms of going through council is, for the time being, for me, it was important that we put everything on the table. And when things have settled, because council's been through some change, and likewise ourselves, is to potentially separate out the reports, but a valid point.
Any further questions, comments on the letter? Appear to be none. So do you want to move on to the next? Yep, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So just going to talk about the uncorrected misstatement. So, there was just one uncorrected misstatement. And again, not material, so we were happy to go with it. There was one, most of the disclosures or the misstatements that we picked up and were corrected were around disclosures. And again, to member Jenny's point there, that's in the weeds, but it's again about just bringing it to council, to governors' attention, that these are areas that needs maybe some work on. It's a review of the annual report, doing some pro formas, what actions can be put in place, so can you reduce that amount of that list of corrected disclosures. Last point I just was going to raise was around the quality of the information. I think, my point is significant improvements in year on year that we've seen, be it from the original audit in 2022, J23, 24, and that's across the board. I think good responsiveness from the team, in us receiving the information, etc. The one point we've raised about staff availability, we come and do the audit in September, October, and everyone's on school holiday, so how do we manage that? It's a logistics thing, and we're going to have it every year. The school holidays are always that time of the year, and people have lives, so how do we manage that as well? Is the other thing, point that we've raised there. Chair, I think that was all. Just to say thank you from my side to Monique and Jacinta and the rest of the executive team, and to your councillors and the independent members for the support over the last 3 years. It's been good engaging with you and getting to know you at council. So thank you. Clint. I was going to save our thanks to the end, but I'll deliver it now, which is where we have really appreciated your collaborative approach, and you've always been up for the robust and open discussion, and Mayor Bernie certainly challenged you on well, we all have, but Mayor Bernie in particular has challenged you on fees and value for money, and obviously that timeliness, and you've always been open and willing to have that conversation, and we've really appreciated your approach and your willingness to come to these meetings and answer a range of questions. So thank you for all of your effort and attention and service to us. And Mayor Bernie, did you want to say?
Yeah, can I just add to that? And thank you, Clint, for being able to get to know you a little bit over the last few years. I've appreciated the relationship that we've had. Can I just acknowledge the way that you deal with sometimes some of those things that we don't necessarily want to hear? I think you have got a subtle and nuanced way of delivering those sorts of things, which sounds like you're not really telling us off, but you are, and I appreciate that's a real great talent to have, but also acknowledging the significant improvements that we've made over the last few years and the way that we have acknowledged the things that you have said. I was interested in Jenny's comments around the length of the report, because it was one of the things that you picked up on us in terms of our annual report. So it's interesting that you've got the same issues that we've got, that there's too much information to put into them. And the other suggestion I'd make is around that September-October suggestion of not having enough staff. If Audit New Zealand were willing to pay childminding fees for the staff that are required to have holidays at that time, so they have to look after their children, I'm sure they would be at work. But look, there's going to be some major changes in our sector over the next few years, and that will be in your space as much as ours. And I think, Debbie, you'll obviously have some challenges in terms of the way the sector is heading, and with the waters issue, and plus everything else that the government want to do in terms of benchmarking and rates capping and all those sorts of things that we're going to say. But I'm sure we will continue the good relationship that we've had with Clint, and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Councillor Grimsey.
When your referee changes, it always makes you a little bit cautious, and I guess my double down to you guys is that I think you've probably been a tough but fair referee, Clint, and the team have benefited from that. But I guess my heads up to Debbie would be really if the offside role is changing, early indication to our officers would be really appreciated to help them understand where the offside line is and is not. And I think that's reflected quite clearly in the report in terms of differing opinions about a few of the matters that we're not going to relitigate because you called it offside and we accept it. But an early heads up and direction to officers on anything that fundamentally has changed that would impact next year's report would be really appreciated, so that officers have the time to make the adjustments that they need to make.
It's important that I do note that Debbie has been good and upfront on that matter and setting up meetings with us to understand the approach and give clear guidance on where she stands on things. And I think in relation to valuations, we'll continue to have some good, robust debate about how we get through things. But it's all in the name of doing things well. So I just thought it's important that I mention that.
All right. Any further comments, questions in relation to Audit New Zealand actions, management letter, anything related to that? There appear to be none. Thank you very much, Clint, thank you for your service to us, and welcome, Debbie. We look forward to working with you further. Members, what we'll do is there any further questions or comments in relation to any of the non-Audit New Zealand actions in the monitoring report? Jacinta?
I'll just mention one thing in relation to the valuation side of things. So in my role with the Financial Management Reference Group, with Jenny and I are both on for Taituata, we are working with Audit New Zealand and WSP, Philip Jones as well, together actually on a panel group about how can we improve the way that valuations occur and hopefully look to make things more efficient and collaborative. So we are, as officers, on a journey to continually try and make that better, because it continues to be a challenge. But I just thought I'd flag that that's another angle that we're kind of tackling it from.
I guess following on and picking up on Clint's question or report, but any, I guess, early reflections around that governance involvement in whatever policy we land on in terms of that revaluation process, any thoughts around what could look different to what we've had in the past?
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. I think I'd say that it's probably important that in terms of some of the conversations that we had with the senior person as part of this panel conversation have actually been really useful in terms of audit doing that initial assessment from a risk perspective for valuation that they will perform as part of their planning document for their audit. And then for us to meet with audit, understand some of the key parameters and what they're looking for, to then bring back to this committee and share that and discuss that and make sure that the committee has an input into the approach that we're taking from a risk perspective, because there are different approaches. For example, in relation to our waters, it's a fair value a year for us. We're not planning to do a full valuation, but there are lots of different approaches that we can take to how we assess whether there's been a change in value. So from my perspective, I think, and in terms of what Clint said as well, it's important that this committee have that conversation about the risk assessment and our approach in terms that we're planning to take in that from that perspective.
Thank you for that line of question. Am I right in saying that Council does have some touch points with this topic or theme, both in the context of developing significant or adopting significant forecasting assumptions as part of the LTP in terms of the reval effect, and then obviously annually in terms of its budget setting, in terms of endorsing an assumption around any increase in and what that actually results in for the ratepayer. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely you do. And as part of the annual report process, we showed when we came back and said what had happened with the valuation, talked through the impacts. We then looked at the different impacts on depreciation for future years. But I think the conversation around key assumptions and approach we're taking to valuation to manage that risk around valuation change and the impact on rates, I think there is a good point that could come as part of, for example, an April meeting where we can touch on it there.
Remember, Jenny.
And just a thought also to engage with the valuer early and possibly, involve some advice from them early in that early planning piece, so that any choices there's good advice associated with it.
Anything further? Member Sarah.
Just one question.
Is your thing not working? Oh, yep, sorry.
One thing I wanted to ask about was just the compliance evaluation that had been undertaken 2 years on, and we've still got a few items that are outstanding. And you mentioned in the report that there are ERP changes that need to be made as well. Just wondered if there was a time frame for those things. I think it's important to make sure we've got our GST right.
Paishan, did you want to join us back at the table and take that one?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. There was a compliance evaluation on GST that was undertaken in February 2023, and there's still some remaining items that are outstanding. And the comment was that there are changes that are required to the council's ERP system to allow for coding. I just wondered 2 years on what the sort of time frame was to get those right.
Yes, thank you. When it comes to dealing with our ERP system, we struggle to find time with the consultant to action any things that we would like to improve. As part of the optimization plan that we have with our ERP system, that will be looked at as part of that, which is not going to be an overnight thing. It will be a more longer term solution that we'll be looking into. So that probably will be there for a while until we actually have a solution with how we're dealing with the system.
So I guess that leads to have we got controls in place then to manage the known problem with the system with regards.
Yes, and hence we have come up with a workaround where even though we have a manual process at the moment and that's not going through the systems, so we have the review put in place to make sure that even though it's manual, it is still being checked. Yes.
Anything further? Any further comments, questions? All right. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I will just clarify. So the optimization sort of 12 to 18 months away. We look to replace our ERP. Would be possibly up to 2 years. But we have a consultant on board in the information services team who's actively looking at all of the key improvements that I'd like to make, and whether it makes sense to make some of those changes early and move to the cloud version, or to hold those until we implement, or do something of a progressive nature. So those are being actively worked on a weekly basis, and there are a number of priorities placed on each of them. So in terms of Peishan's question around, some of it makes sense to keep manual for a period of time, some of it actually makes sense to get in and fix it now. So those kind of approaches are well in place at the moment.
And just to clarify, we're intending for a sort of a bit more of a comprehensive IT update for our August meeting. I know that's a little way away, but the intention is to follow on from the presentation that Nikki Brady gave last year to cover a number of those things. All right, we have just two recommendations on page 61 of your agenda. So that's C and D. So I'll move that we note attachment A and the monitoring report in attachment B. If I could have a seconder for that. Councillor Grimstone. Any further discussion? All in favour of that motion? Thank you. All right, we will move on to item 6.3. Peishan gets a break and we'll invite Ashley up to the table. No? You're looking? No? Okay, cool. Right, this is our work program. I'm hoping this can be a reasonably quick conversation, but did you want to introduce that?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. So we've got the base work program that works out to the next couple of meetings, but as part of this, we haven't actually worked it. Normally we work it for the financial year, but we've put some base information in for the April meeting, and we also wanted to have a conversation with the table around some ideas and suggestions as well for the August meeting, which will be the last one at the Triennium. We, as Councillor Jennings mentioned, one of them is around, so we had a really good update by Nikki a little while back and Christian around the IT program and what we're doing in that space. There's been some excellent work happening in the team and they've made great progress, but I think it would make sense if it works okay for the committee that we wait till August to give that full update and allow a bunch more work to happen. But happy to take any feedback or ideas about what you might like to see as we work up to the end of the training.
Any observations, ideas, comments? Councillor Proctor.
This may not be appropriate to be on the work program for this committee, but an update on your discussions over the climate loans from LGFA that we just talked about before.
I think in terms of the Treasury report, we can definitely include some commentary around any additional work that we've done and criteria around it as part of that report, if that works.
Just to unpack that with you a little bit further, are you looking at how, for coverage around how we're actually using that, whether we're going to try and pursue that? I wonder if that's more of a full council.
Sorry, I might have misunderstood that. Yeah, so that's okay. So as part, I think probably the first place to have a conversation about that will be through the Capital Project Steering Group as we look at projects and where ones might fit. And then as we work into the annual plan conversation, we can bring that back to the full council table if that works. But in advance of that, we can make sure we've got the criteria well understood to bring to that.
I'm happy to talk to the chair of Capital Steering, Councillor Ross Brannigan, to just bring him up to speed with what we've heard today and some of the material. So I'm happy to take that as an action. I have talked to the team about following our April meeting, having a session that's not formally part of the meeting, but just a reflection session where we, with your support and input, I'm hoping that we could develop a committee or chair's reflection report that we would then formally adopt at the August meeting, just in terms of some of the ongoing work and also things, perhaps a bit of a critique of how the committee's operated, things that have worked, things that haven't worked, or things that could be improved. So with your support and endorsement, I think that I'd like to do that after the next meeting. And so unless there's anything in particular that members would like to prioritise or suggest is placed on the either April or August meeting program, that August meeting is going to be quite a slim agenda, I think, just acknowledging where we are in the training. And any further questions? Oh.
Just perhaps, I know that you've got it for April, but I wonder also as we're getting closer to sort of deadlines that there's more of an update on the and perhaps some of the risks that might have been identified from the local waters pieces of work as well. I think that's a very big topic for the council, so it'd be useful to sort of keep it front and centre.
Member Jenny.
Also, I just was thinking about the annual report that you'll assume complete summary around about September, so maybe it's just missing off the program at the end.
Thanks. Yes, we're just waiting for confirmation. We're hoping that we'll be able to adopt before we break for the elections, but we haven't received confirmation just yet.
Chair, the other thing that worries me a little bit is the economic regulator and the work that the Commerce Commission are doing on through local water done well economic regulations, and that may need some oversight from this committee, I think.
Right, happy. We can. I'll talk to the team and we can program that. It may be that we need to do some work. It may be that we can't necessarily program anything for April. We might not know enough, but we could do some out of meeting also engagement. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, unless there's any further comments, questions, ideas, what I'll do is I'll move on page 163, item B, that the Risk and Assurance Committee supports the proposed Risk and Assurance Committee work program for 24-25. Seconded by Councillor Young. All in favour? Thank you. All right, we'll move to item 6.4 and invite Tanya and Ashley up to the table. This is our Health, Safety and Wellbeing Dashboard quarterly report. So just capturing that we've got obviously the dashboard, a deep dive into confined spaces, and then we also have a deep dive into significant incidents. However, that part of that will be dealt with in committee, public excluded, further or later in the meeting. So if you have any questions about those things, if you could hold those. With that caveat, over to you, Tanya, to introduce the report.
Sorry, not sure why that left my brain just there. Thank you very much, Chair, and hello, committee members. I'll take the report as been read. I do have a few key points I'd like to highlight from that report. Firstly, on the front page with the safety index, the very blue page, we have a change in our access to the external provider that we could compare our Safe Plus rating against other government departments. So we have brought that to an internal now assessment on ourselves, how we improve. So this quarter has not changed. Our next quarter's report will show that improvement across our leadership, worker engagement and risk management areas. We've also completed another quarter with exceptional reporting. It's highlighting our ever-increasing maturity around reporting. We're getting instances of reporting that people are confident to let us know about things that are happening and engaging in our health, safety and wellbeing across council.
Attached to the dashboard on page 178 at the end of the dashboard report is commentary related to the data. You'll note an increase in threatening behaviour across all areas of council. We're undertaking additional training in de-escalation and situational safety for our staff in this area. There hasn't been one thing that has driven this type of behaviour. It has been across many different areas of council, and our staff once again are showing that maturity to say, I need to report this, this is something we need to understand better. So that has shown an increase. I'm happy now to take any questions of the dashboard report or the confined spaces deep dive.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm just going to start us off with a question where we obviously received this reporting through this committee for assurance purposes and to discharge our due diligence obligations, but also because it's the right thing to do. And obviously council also receives health and safety reporting through the organisational performance report. But I guess my question is, are you confident that elected members and governance is exercising that adequately, its due diligence? Is there anything further that you would be expecting, anticipating, or anything further that you think that governance should be leaning into to ensure that we are actively performing our due diligence obligation? I'm sorry I put you on the spot with that, but I'm really interested in your perspective on that.
Thank you for the question, Chair. I think there are a couple of areas. We have the opportunity to do leadership walks every 2 months, and the elected members have been invited to those. So that would be an excellent opportunity to come along and see from an officer perspective, engaging with the officers, potentially contractors, and those engaged in that health and safety space, how they do their work, what their risks look like, how they assess their risks and mitigate them. So that would be an excellent opportunity to more regularly involve in. And training, possibly there's some courses through the Directors Institute, and NZLG, I think, also have those health and safety courses that are available, online modules. Would be fantastic. That'd be the two off the top of my mind on that question.
Really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Councillor Proctor.
Thanks. I think the reports are great. They're really easy to see all the data and drill down into things. I've got a bit of a question. I suppose it's a bit outside the permit of what we're really talking about, but I look at the e-road data, and even though we have a bunch of ridiculous speed limits across our district, I'm just wondering about how the e-road system is managed, and it seems like there's probably an issue with the e-road system with that many overspeeds around, the way that system operates, and I'm just wondering how the data is actually used and applied in a real world organisational context, considering that there's probably a lot of issues with e-road rather than people speeding and doing a whole lot of dangerous things. And the cost of e-road, is it really that cost effective to have that system in place if it's creating this much variation in data or problems?
So a couple of points that you raised there. So one of the things around e-road, there's absolutely some roads where it may pick up different speed limits, especially where speed limits have recently changed. They are pretty responsive around changing those, but for instance, you can sometimes be in the service lane here, and that's 30 k's, vice versa, this is 50, and it pick up difference. Majority of the reporting that comes through here is accurate. Every second that you are speeding above the limit, when you go past that speed sign, so you're driving, here's a 50k, you pass it every second is one of those. 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, 4 second, it's picked up. And so if it takes you 5 seconds to reduce your speed after
the speed limit has changed, we will get notification. Noting that when the E-roads is reported, there are levels. So that yellow E-road is 10k over, orange is 15, and red is 20. And so if we're in the red, you're not only breaking the law, but also should you be driving that way within a council vehicle. You will see that there is looking to be a bit of an increase in the E-roads. We have quite a few new staff members that have joined us. We're now getting just into the practice of, remember to maintain the speed, look at how we're driving. We're doing quite a bit of work in that space at the moment. It is pretty accurate. However, there are bits across the district where Arapaipai Road is a really good one, kind of 80, 100 into 50. That one there can pick up at times. But yeah, we have been doing quite a bit of work in this space.
That's good to hear that it's being used as sort of an advisory tool rather than a punitive tool. Because I have heard some companies report about sort of conflicts with health and safety or well-being around when it's used as a punitive tool. And there's a bit of a trend now that people spend more time watching the E-road screen than they do watching the road as well.
Yeah, and I guess there are other companies do tolerances where it's 5k over. Ours is 10, so 10k's over the limit is quite a bit, really, especially if you're in a 50k area, you're now going 60, you could be going past a whole group of people. One of the things I would say is that where there are trends of people that are doing overspeeds, there is a process that we do follow and go through in that space, but it isn't a punitive tool to do that. It's more actually how we're being safe in the community, how we're being seen, a reputation in our vehicles, how we're abiding by the law that's out there.
If I could just add to that, it's also a very good way to be able to identify where our staff is if anything happens. So it has benefits, most definitely, alongside any sort of lone worker apps that we use to be able to know if we need to find staff.
Councillor Grimson.
Just point of clarification. Thank you for the explanation to Councillor Proctor's question. So I know it's events. So is that graph just purely reporting on speed-related events, not hard braking? Cool. And I guess the comment would it be difficult to actually have that graph focus on the number of incidents rather than the actual events? Because it seems a bit silly that we're seeing a graph that's reporting the number of seconds somebody is over a speed limit that distorts the actual number of incidents. I would have thought that, I'd much rather understand the number of incidents versus the number of reported 1 second drives over the speed limit. Is that possible?
Yeah, we can absolutely look into that. What I would say is that often that people realise, and so majority of these would be no more than 5 seconds. But yeah, absolutely, we can look into that.
Any further questions or comments on first the dashboard, and then we'll turn to confined spaces? Anything on the dashboard? Yeah, Bernie.
Look, I appreciate the contractor health and safety reporting. I think that's actually really valuable now, especially with they are considered basically council workers. So the fact that they that is reported is fantastic because they're very customer facing staff as well. My only very slight criticism is the graphs that we have. It looks like Green by Nature has 12 incidents and PPCS has 1, but they're at the same level on the graph. And if you looked at that like it was, you would think that they're an equal sort of numbers. So somehow can we normalise the graphs so that they look like they should do somehow? Thank you.
Apologies, we've tried to do that across all the graphs, but we've obviously not picked up that one. Thank you, Bernie.
All right, no further questions on the dashboard. Turning then to the deep dive on confined spaces, is there any reflections, comments, questions? None. Appears the work that you have undertaken is very comprehensive and that everyone has understood it and it's provided significant assurance. So thank you very much for your work on that. Excellent. All right. We will. We've already noted and received the report. We will then move to item 6.5 to welcome Peishan back to the table. Peishan, over to you.
Hi again. So this report is to provide treasury update to the committee for the December quarter. Taking the paper as read, a few key points to note is that as at the end of the 31st of December, we've entered into 50 million worth of forward swaps. That's in an attempt to look to manage our interest rate risk better, as well as making sure that we're policy compliant. Our pre-funding plan has not changed, so we'll be looking at doing that in April. We have also reviewed our interest forecast to be more in line with the current market trend and our borrowing expectation. One thing not mentioning is that you notice that our net debt to revenue ratio has not changed a lot over the past couple of months. That's mainly due to us so the ratio has not changed a lot in the recent months. It's the office is currently going through a capital project prioritization exercise that will be brought back to the council on the 19th of March. And so following that, we'll be assessing our borrowing requirements again and see whether things will change. Happy to take questions.
I'm going to start, thank you, Peishan, with the graph on page 206, which is the Horowhenua District Council interest rate projection. My understanding was that our cost of borrowing was likely to track down and get better. So can you treat me like I'm a complete idiot and explain to me why that graph shows the interest rate projection trending upwards?
Page 204.
206.
That's the one named Debt and Cover Profile. So that interest rate projection is provided by Banco and it's looking into a much longer term. And so whereas in the near future, it will have a trend down on the interest rate, the projection for 10, 20 years is going to be looking a bit higher.
Okay. So it's taking a long-term view over the next, it's 8 years. Okay. So we're basically what this is telling us, and all the other contents of the report is telling us that there's going to be some short-term relief in terms of those interest rates. Our cost of borrowing will come down, but we should be prepared for interest rates to increase, and so therefore what this is telling us is that we need to be really smart and think ahead around what our debt requirements are and what our profile looks like. Is that, summarise that?
Yes.
Can I just follow on from that? Because what is the usual, one of the parts of the report is about the length of the loan. And I can't remember if it was Treasury or GFA said that we're not very good at actually, the length of the loans are quite short for a lot of our debt. What is the usual length that we would borrow for a project, say, a capital expenditure project like MacArthur Street, we need to borrow? Is it 10 years and then we just have to go and reloan that money, when we pay it back and reloan that money for another 10-year period, or how long? What is this? How do we do that?
Our current borrowing profile ranges from 8 to 10 years in terms of the borrowing terms. As they fall due, depending on our ability to pay back, usually they get refinanced again.
Because we don't look as though we actually pay back any loans. We just add on. We just, we've got new ones and we just then refinance the old ones. So that's why our level of debt continues to grow. Am I right in that assumption?
Effectively, yeah, because overall we don't treat it as an individual loan for a project. We more look at overall, do we need 10 million more in a year, so we'll continue to borrow that. But in terms of the length, LGFA would quite like the length of the borrowing to increase because they do borrow out longer. Our advice from Bancorp at this stage is we do keep, if you look at on our graph on page 205, that kind of gives you a view of all of our debt and how far out it goes or the maturity of it. So you can see sort of all of the longest term of our debt at this stage goes out to 2029. So ours is in quite a short program, but from our perspective, from a risk perspective, LGFA is unlikely to have an issue with us rolling our debt when it becomes due. And so from that perspective, the advice has been that we don't necessarily need to hold it really long. And that hasn't been something that is unusual for councils to sort of have a maturity profile that's in that realm. We're probably a little bit on the short side, but that gives you a view of sort of where it sits. So the big bit is that we don't necessarily apply it to a particular project. It's more how much do we need overall. So for us, I think it's I mentioned to you in your email, 2028 or 2030 when our borrowing starts to hit its high point, and then at that stage, then it starts to track down if we're meeting our financial strategy in terms of completing the massive part of that growth work, so that we can increase our rates and start to pay some of that back. And your question, Councillor Jennings, yes, some of our while interest rates might start to go up after that point, we should have less debt on our books so that interest won't be as big a factor as it is now.
Councillor Grimsby, did you want to build on this line of question?
I was, because I just wanted to confirm with Jacinta around back to Sam's question in relation to the interest rate forecast. I mean, one of the factors to me looks very much like through 2027, 2028, we've got some loans that have been on one point something, 2 point something. So as they roll off, they are, based on current forecasts, going to go on a much higher level of debt, assuming we don't repay them. And also one of the other factors that would potentially have an influence, from my understanding, would be the market changes in the US that is noted in the report as well, that has changed that curve in the last 3 months as well. So I suspect if we went back and looked at the previous quarter report, that trend trajectory will look quite different because of those forecasted changes coming through.
Yeah, thanks for that discussion, because that was my initial reaction at the table on page 207, was that we've got about $37 million but in 27-28 that's in a sub 2.5% interest rate that all of a sudden, and so it was about that sudden shock kind of, but essentially the messaging is that there's some smoothing. Yeah, okay.
Effectively, what Bancorp will do with us is they'll look at our whole profile of what we've got in our loan book, and then we'll look at what debt we're expecting to have based on our capital program, and then they'll do that weighted average calculation of, based on the debt you haven't yet got committed or you need to renew, what do those new interest rates look like, and then they'll broaden or average that interest rate into what you see in that graph in terms of the expected level of interest rates. Yeah.
Thank you for allowing us to unpack that. Any further questions, comments for Peishan? Member Jenny.
Just a quick one. My favourite topic, the debt to revenue ratio projection. You mentioned CapEx reprioritisation, which I assume you're talking about the annual plan 25-26. So just to check in around how we're going with that debt to revenue ratio. I understand your annual plan, you not doing a big engagement because it's pretty much sticking with what you had in year 2 of the LTP. But yeah, I'm just interested in what are your latest projections around that debt to revenue, and is it staying in line with what the LTP said?
At this stage, through Mr. Chair, it is relatively expected to stay in the same trajectory, where it's still growing for a few more years. But what we are doing at the moment is there is extensive work happening with the capital projects across the organisation, where we're looking at what they've spent. Does it make sense? Is it still going to sit in this year, next year, or the year after? So I don't think there isn't expected to be any significant changes in the net debt required. There might be some changes where we've had a change in the timing of funding, so we've needed to bring the capital project down to take account of that. Mm-hmm. But it may be a change within the couple of 2 to 3 year period, but not overall.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. I suppose the key thing is just about managing the risk that we're bumping up quite close to that limit, and LGFA put the handbrake on the funding. Yeah.
Any further comments, questions? Any further reflections from you, Peishan? No? All right. Thank you, committee members. We'll turn to the recommendation on page 199, which is C. So I'll move that the committee notes the Bangkok Treasury reporting dashboard for the December 2024 quarter. Seconded by Mayor Burney. All in favour? Thank you. All right. We will then now move to item 6.6. This is the financial dashboard that the committee had requested, and the team met with Jenny and I for an initial session, and this is 6. Have I missed 6.6? 6.6. Sorry, I think we've got an incorrect reference to 6.7 on the top of the page, but you're right. 6.6. Is that right? 215. Apologies. Oh, yes, apologies. So 6.6, sensitive expenditure report. Thank you, Mayor Burney. So just noting that Mayor Burney has declared an interest in this matter as one of the people referenced in the report, noting, however, that obviously all elected members have an interest in relation to some of the expenditure noted in the report. Peishan.
So this report is to provide information required for the committee to note sensitive expenditure of the mayor, the elected members, and the CE for compliance with our sensitive expenditure policy. So the reporting period is for 1st January to 31st of December 2024. Total spending is $28,232.62, excluding GST, and it's the detail is listed in the report. I'll take questions.
Just to reinforce for any members of the public watching that just because it's of sensitive expenditure, it doesn't mean there's anything we need to be concerned about. It's just part of our adopted policy around particular type of expenditure that we have certain protocols around. And so for transparency purposes, this is obviously part of our assurance function. Any comments, questions in relation to the report? No. All right. We will then move on to item 6.7 on page 215, and that's the financial dashboard. And as alluded to previously, Member Jenny and I met with the staff, and at the request of this committee, the team have developed the dashboard, and so this is the opportunity to provide comments, reflections. I'll let you introduce it first. Sorry, Peishan.
The introduction will be quick. So this is a dashboard report to show our financial performance and some key topics results, including data as of 31st of December 2024. And so that's the result that's showing. And this is the first dashboard report we've developed, and we welcome feedback from the committee.
Reactions, feelings. A note, Mayor Burney, obviously you sent through a question ahead of the meeting. Thank you for that. But yeah, would really appreciate your feedback and views. Councillor Olsen.
Brilliant. Sorry. No, it's great. Like I'm a visual person, so it's pretty user friendly for me. But it also, I think, as we go forward, we can actually track and graph movements, which makes it quite good for looking back historically as well. So no, really pleased, and I think it's a great layout.
Any further reflections, comments?
No,
Member Sarah.
I echo those comments. I think it's a very good way of people actually being able to focus in, particularly if you're not financial, on seeing where things are visually. I think it's very good. I'm not a visual person, so it's good.
Councillor Grimstone.
Just looking at the overdue debtor space, and we've trended down from 2021, 2022, 2023. We've bumped back up to 2024. Where do we feel forecasting 2025 is potentially going to land?
This will be a very difficult one for me to predict. With the average rates increase that we experienced last year and this year as well, we have been, and there has been a lot of ratepayers getting in touch to do payment plans, to do a lot of to ask for a lot of help. And so in that sense, we're trying hard to make sure that we can manage that with working with the ratepayers in earlier on payment plans and different things. And so some of the arrears that might be showing might be something that we already have in place in terms of our payment plans. And so the hope is that we continue to monitor that and make sure that we're open for that sort of options with the ratepayers and not to exceed what we had in 2024.
Jacinta?
Just add one thing as well is we're aware in the rate space we've got a really solid focus on. Water rates is one area where we've increased our focus significantly to make sure that we're tidying up anything that's older and needs. There's a few in that space definitely that needs a bit of work. In the sundry debtor space, that's another area where we are conscious it hasn't had the level of focus that it needs. And so we are changing the resourcing in that space, changing the focus of people's time. And also we've developed some dashboard reports for our activity managers to use to understand at a customer level who owes what and what's overdue, and that gets focus at our senior leadership meetings with the activity managers and also at our leadership team as well. So the focus on it has significantly increased to make sure that we are getting cleaner with it, I guess I would say.
I guess just dropping down to the graph underneath, just in relation to the rates remission piece, we're already over our allocated budget in that space. Do we have concerns that that's going to grow significantly? Because my understanding is clearly we've done a lot of work in the last 2 years around raising community awareness around remission, and last year we reset our remissions policy, which clearly there's a flow-through effect into more remissions being at play. My just concern is that have we undershot where the budget needed to be, and are we going to continue to see a significant overflow?
Thanks. It's a good point. The one key item that's driving most of that is this. I think it's 57,000 that relates to council's utilities. So it comes out the other side in that we've got higher rates revenue from some of it, but it's a higher in the remission. So it's probably a reporting anomaly in the way we've described it that makes it look like we've spent more in remissions than we should have, which I think we can correct. But it's on the other areas where that's definitely being monitored very closely in terms of making sure we don't go above what we said we would.
And Councillor Grimstone, just to note that on page 215, paragraph 4, there is several bullets there that sort of outline some of the further elements that may be incorporated into the dashboard, and I think that probably is a nice segue into, is there anything that people think is missing from the dashboard acknowledging that there's some further thinking to be done around those items that are bulleted and specifically referenced under paragraph 4. Jenny.
I think this is a great dashboard, so well done. I think a bit that could be added is maybe just a traffic light, green, on track, or at risk. So just to help the reader, because there's a lot of information, and it's just to get a bit of a sense of where are the risk areas or where are the problem areas, just to be able to zoom in and not read all of it. That would be my one suggestion. But well done to the team.
Thank you for that feedback. Any further comments, questions, reflections?
Mainly around any topics that you would like to cover for the next dashboard, or whether this is okay, that we'll carry on in an update.
My response to that, Pei-Shan, would often depend on the time of the year that we're sitting in the financial year. I mean, there will be some things as we get to the second half of the financial year that will be far more important than they will be, say, in the first quarter of the financial year. So I'd like it to be as flexible as possible in terms of ensuring that we're current and relevant to what we're actually got in front of us, but also seeing those trends over time. I mean, there's a few trends out of this that are really interesting in terms of the last 5 years. So I'd like to see that continue. But I hope it's not going to be concrete in terms of what we're delivering, that we're going to be flexible enough to think, okay, this topic is appropriate at this time of the year, rather than something else.
So my thinking in capacity as chair, I would be looking for perhaps the one page to have the things we always want to see, remembering that this is an essential risk tool that we've asked to be developed, and perhaps the backside is something that is some of those more those things that might be a bit more agile or dynamic, and perhaps incorporating some of those other areas that we're going to work on, so that we can just develop that, acknowledging so it is flexible and we have that and dynamic, but that we also have the consistency on just the key pieces of information that we're going to use as a risk tool. So, having heard that commentary, is everyone comfortable with that approach? Is that workable for you, Pei-Shan?
As long as we have a bit of an advance notice, then we can work on them. Yes.
All right. Unless there's any further questions, comments on form and function of the tool or the content, we'll move on. Thanks, Pei-Shan. All right. We are therefore at the end of our open agenda. So what I'll do is I'll move that that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting, which is 6.4, Health, Safety and Wellbeing Dashboard Quarterly Report, Attachment C, Deep Dive on Significant Incidents, February 2025, and C1, Risk Management Quarterly Report. And the ground is Section 48(1)(a). If I go to seconded by Councillor Young, all in favour? Thank you. Yeah, we'll have a 5-minute break.